If you're like me, you've probably not been able to resist buying this cute little GoPro camera, especially after watching some of the demo videos online. It just is irresistible. And so recently I did pick up one and have had quite a little bit of fun with it. It was a little steep learning curve, actually, I have to admit myself. Had to watch some tutorials online to figure out how to even open it. But once you start playing with it a little bit, you'll find that there are some very wonderful, unique things that you can do with it. And if you are an Edius editor, you might be wondering what are some of the most optimal ways to work with the footage. And so in this tutorial, I think we'll take a look at how to create a time-lapse based on a time-lapse that you've shot. And perhaps in some future tutorials we'll take a look at some of the other ways that you can edit the footage. Now the first question might be, what should be my project settings? You know, GoPro has a lot of settings itself, and what would be the best setting to edit in? You're probably better to go with a progressive format, and I would stay within the high definition format even if you're working with footage that is of a much higher resolution. Now some of that will depend on how you're planning to deliver and who you're delivering to as to what you might choose to do. But if you know that your project is just going to be staying HD, it's better to edit in the HD. Now, I don't see I have a progressive option here. Let's click the Customize. Let's go through our settings here. Change this to a progressive HD 1920 by 1080 at 29.97p for progressive. And for an audio preset, I have chosen just the 2-channel. That's plenty fine. And for advanced, we won't be needing the alpha channel in this case, so we could switch that to the standard. But let's maybe go up to the 10-bit. We might be able to work with our footage just a little bit better with the 10-bit color space, and everything else should be good. Let's go over here. Now since we are working in a 10-bit environment, we can go down here and choose the Grass Valley HQX Superfine for our codec. And since we are going to be resizing the footage, you know, these JPEGs are quite large, but we're going to be bringing them down to an HD size. So let's choose a resampling method that's going to handle that a little better. Let's bring this down to Langsauce 3. Choose that, because that gives us perhaps the best quality when resizing. And I think everything else is pretty much the way I like it. So let's hit OK. And let's go to our location where our footage has been transferred to, our JPEGs on this time-lapse. Okay, I think this is the one we want to work with. Let's just hit the first frame, and you'll see down here that you can choose to create a sequence clip. Just check that and then hit open. And Edius will bring that in. We'll put you on pause while that comes in. All right, our clip has come in, and it has come in as what's called a sequence clip. And it by default gives it the looks like the name of G. We can change that. This is a clip of the Bangkok airport. And let's bring it down to our timeline and place it on. Now, the first time you look at one of these, you might be a little bit dismayed. What's going on? It's not filling my whole screen. Well, not to worry. This is just an aspect ratio issue. We will be able to fill our screen with this shot, and we'll show you that in a minute. This is simply the size or the aspect ratio that the GoPro takes when it takes still shots. And when you do a time lapse, you're just taking multiple still shots. If we were to look at any one of these JPEGs and take a look down here at the dimensions in Windows Explorer, you can see that the dimensions are 4,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels. And that's why when you make a sequence clip out of this, that it is not going to be in a 16:9 aspect ratio. But when we right-click on our clip and go to Layouter, we can see that we can just drag any one of these corners out and fill our screen. And if we were to scroll down here and take a look at what percentage of our shot that we're actually covering, even after stretching it out like this, we'll see that we're still only at 54% of our image. We could go in a lot further without losing any resolution. Let's just, for example, move that up a little bit to 70%. You can see that we can move in on our shot quite a bit without losing any resolution. And if you don't like the framing of your shot, because you have all of those pixels to work with, well, we can adjust our framing. This tool here and move it up. There, now we're getting the top portion of the roof of the airport here kind of going through our upper third. As we look through it, that may be just a little bit too much. Maybe we wanted to see a little bit more of that. So let's bring that back down so that we can see a little bit more of this portion of the airport. Okay, that looks pretty good. You know, one of the things that I worried about when I first got the GoPro camera, because I did not buy the attachable screen that you can put on the back of it, I wondered how on earth will you ever be able to get a level horizon if you can't see what you're shooting. Well, once I started shooting with it and editing the footage, I realized that that's not really an issue because you're shooting higher than high definition resolution. You can adjust your horizon in post. Over here under the rotate button, you'll notice that you can rotate this image. And because we're working with a lot higher resolution than what we need for high definition video, we're not going to lose any quality by rotating this out unless we go too far and then have to move in on that. We might go past the 100%. But for the most part, you'll probably get the horizon pretty close when you're shooting and then can make fine-tune adjustments when you go to edit the footage, to process the footage. So now we've moved in on our shot, we've framed our shot, we've adjusted the horizon. I think we're ready to try an export of this clip. Now if we try and play this in real time, you'll see that Edius, depending on your system I suppose, but it's probably going to have a difficult time playing that in real time. You'll see my red line comes up there. So we need to render this in order to view it in real time. Let's just right click on the clip and go to render, or use the Shift plus G. Now it'll render that clip, and I'll put you on pause while it does that. Okay, now that that is rendered, we should be able to watch this in real time. See people walking around the Bangkok airport there. Now that looks quite fine as far as time lapses go. However, if you wanted to give a little bit more of a blur motion effect, we could try adding an Edius filter to this. And so we could go over to filters and our motion blur filter and drag that on. Now you'll notice what happened here is that once we applied that filter, we've gone back to our red, meaning that it needs to be rendered again. And if we wanted to be able to make adjustments, say we're not happy with one level of motion blur and we want to try it again, we'd have to render it again. And so what might be better at this point is to simply export the section of video that we want to be able to work with. What we'll do here now is export. Well, first of all, let's do a couple of undos so that we can get back to our rendered video before we applied the filter. Okay, I believe this is the rendered part. We can play it in real time. Now let's do our export. F11, and let's export it as the Grass Valley HQX since we're in a 10-bit project. Hit save. And because this is a file that's already rendered, the export should be fairly fast. If you were just exporting without rendering first, this would probably take a little longer. And then when that finishes up, if we go to our bin, it should show up there as the last item in your bin window that's currently open. And now we can drag this down to our timeline, and this will not only play in real time, but because it's a Grass Valley codec, we should be able to add Grass Valley filters and effects and be able to play in real time and make our adjustments and check them again, and it'll be a lot easier to work with. So now we've added some blur, and you can see that it adds an interesting effect. Maybe I'll go full screen here. But it might be just too much of a blur. By default, Edius adds quite a bit of motion blur, and so we might want to back off on that a little bit. And you can do that by going over to your information palette and click on the filter that shows up there, and let's back off on that to maybe say around 70% and see what that looks like. Might be just a little too jerky now. Let's find something in between, 80. And then you might want to just do a little bit of color correction to it. Let's drop on our YUV curve. And you might want to try other filters and effects depending on the type of footage you're working with, the shot that you're working with. You may need more color correction. You might want to try some of the other video filters. Some of these filters are only available, are only work in the 8-bit environment. So you might be running up against some challenges there. But you could always do everything that we have just demonstrated in the 8-bit environment as well. I just think that we might be able to get just a little bit better results if we export or process this and export in the 10-bit environment. So with our blur effect on, let's export this one more time. And I'm going to use the Grass Valley HQX again, because these will play in an 8-bit environment. For some reason it keeps defaulting back to online standard. Let's save this as a default maybe. And let's call this final. And this will take probably a little bit longer because we added the effects, filters. Has to do a little bit more processing. Okay, let's maybe drop that on our timeline and take a look at it full screen. And you know, for a $400 camera, that's not too bad. Quite amazing, actually. All right, well, I think that does it for editing a GoPro time-lapse with Edius 6.5.